I'm absolutely delighted to be joined by you both, our good friends and history tour guides, Tony and Trevor. There's no two men that can talk more thoroughly and eloquently about the vital role that history plays in our school curriculum and the role that being on tour plays for young people engaging with history. What I'm interested to explore first is, what is your background? What sparked your interest to retell the stories of our past?
Do you want to go first?
I will, if you'd like me to, Trevor. Yes, well, I have collected war medals from many years ago. I think I bought my first one for 5 shillings in a shop in Leatherhead, and it was a 1914 star. And on the back of that star was the name Private Clutterbuck, I remember, Grenadier Guards. And I carried on collecting medals, and they got names on, the First World War ones in particular. So I thought after a while, well, it'd be interesting to find out more about this man. Who is this man who's named on this medal? So I did some research, and then I thought, well, let's go and find out where he was. And so I persuaded my son to come with me, and we went off on our first battlefield tour. And from then on, I got into battlefield touring, taking out, first of all, friends and family, and then latterly commercial groups. So that's how I got into battlefield guiding. It was about following up the stories of the men from the past.
I started, I enjoyed history at school, but when I joined the Air Force and I was stationed in the Middle East, I was way back, and I was stationed in the area, of course, Lawrence of Arabia, in Saudi Arabia and around those places. And everywhere I've been, be it Singapore or Germany in my military career, I've always taken an interest in their history, the country's history, and our involvement in it. And when I had a role, one of my roles when I was in the Air Force was working for NATO. So I used to travel around NATO countries, assessing various aspects of what they had to look after our people in wartime. Mm-hmm. And when I retired, people came to me and said, "Oh, you're used to travelling around Europe on your own and everything, and you're interested in history. Would you like to come and work as a guide?" And so I started off there in the old days and doing Arnhem and the Dam Busters, and that's where I started. And then other companies hear of you and offer you various trips, and so you go away and study. And in the winter, when it's quiet for guides, we sort of bimble off into Europe and try and discover stuff to present to our clients at a later date. So that's how I ended up in doing history guiding and tour guiding.
Okay, and what are the rewards in telling those stories to young people and seeing them engage in that?
I think when you, should we say, take a school kid and you take them to a relative's grave, and you've got to remember, especially First World War, we're now over 100 years on, and no one's ever visited before. This is the first time anyone's visited, and they're only 14, 15 years old, and all of a sudden it gives them an interest, and I think Tony will agree. They go back off that, and it starts their family history, because they go back to hopefully they've got the grandparents are still alive, and they ask the grandparents, and the grandparents will then give them. And I've heard of many people from these trips go back and start the family and find out things they never knew before.
I think I heard a lot of that dialogue on the trip that I went with you to the battlefields. There was a lot of talk of grandparents wanting to find the names. I know that was something that you were keen to try and help them with. And I assume that just really kind of personalises the whole experience for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was one I went on, I remember, because it sticks in my mind. And this was again a school tour, and this was actually the teacher, and it was the name of one of his relatives, and it was up there on a memorial. He didn't have a grave; it was on the memorial. And he looked up, and he pointed to it, and he said, "You know what?" He said, "It's not just a name on a wall, is it?" And that stuck in my mind as something like that. And another one where I had some Canadian kids, and we were going specifically to one of the Second War cemeteries south of Caen, and we were going to look for the particular grave for this girl. And in we go, we find the grave, and as you say, the child's in tears, it was first time ever. But as we were leaving, one of the boys noticed another headstone near the gateway with a surname on it which rang a bell. He said, "I'm sure that's a member of my family." And he got on the phone to his grandmother and said, "Look, I'm standing in front of this grave, and it's Private X." And she said, "Oh, that's your long lost," etc. And there, out of the blue, this family had found, they hadn't been aware that he was buried there, and suddenly, just coincidentally, we found it.
Yeah, it's priceless when that happens, isn't it? I remember I did a trip, I did the Great Escape in Poland, and went back there, and it wasn't until I'd been around the camp at Stalingrad 3, and the guy told me he'd been a prisoner there. You just can't buy that information.
The moments like
and
those.
Unfortunately, of course, they've all gone now. The last one, a chap called Jack Lyons, died about 5 years ago.
Okay.
At 101. Yeah. So it's those sort of.
I think when we're talking about the roles of the history guys, if I talk about it from my perspective, I've been very lucky to travel out with you twice in the last year and been quite in awe at the knowledge and skills that you guys hold and share with everyone, and your kind of passion for continually wanting to refine and improve your skills. So even though you're up at 5, 6 in the morning for a long, long day, you're there at night at 9, 10 o'clock at night in the hotel bar, having dialogue as guides, if you're both out there, about what can you do better tomorrow? How can we refine this itinerary on the spot? Do you find that sharing of ideas just being really critical to you being the best you can be?
That's right.
And one of the things we do, again as a group, we're both members of the Guild of Battlefield Guides, and there are times when we go out as a group of guides to a place which we may think we know pretty well, and between us then we'll look at it with new eyes. So we do our reconnaissance trips, as we call them, out to the battlefields as a group of guides, and present to each other and really hone the craft, if you like.
As a battlefield guide, there's always something comes out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
Always. And if someone says, "Oh no, they know it all,"
No.
That is not right. And we're always willing to learn. That's the thing, you have to be. And we spark off each other. It just happens that we spark off each other, and he tells me stuff and I tell him stuff. And and the stories unfold.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I really picked up on tour is that I think you give students a real safe space to, how can I put it? They become armed with knowledge of things that they don't want to see repeated in the future.
Yes.
And for me, that was a real eye-opener on tour, seeing how you do that, because I think students were likening it to things that were happening in the current day. And they were like, we don't want to see that kind of dictatorship. We don't want to see that kind of... do you set out to purposely do that so they can relate it to kind of...
Yeah, I think history
future?
matters. There's definitely history matters. You can't alter it. It's happened.
No.
What you've got to do is learn from it. And I think, you're referring to a trip we did to Ypres and Somme. I think you'll agree, the students and the teachers were quite amazed when you start giving them the numbers have died. And you point out, should we say, Battle of Passchendaele, and the thousands of men just for that bit of land. And, you relate it to their school. You say to the teacher, "Oh, how many students you got?" And they say, "Oh, I've got 1,800. That's nothing. That's a drop in the ocean when we start talking numbers.
The scale is monumental, and you do see that message really register in the
youngsters
students
today go, "But why did they do that, sir? Why did they go over the top? Why did they just charge forward?"
But what a nice safe space to be able to talk so openly about so many deaths and much unrest. And I think the other thing is, again, I know what I took away from these trips was that you kind of humanised everyone, that everybody needed to be remembered, and whether you were British or German, you were just doing what you were told.
That's right.
We were all doing the same, and you really do humanise, and I think that is something that I think as an individual I've never considered. And I know children won't have done, I'm 47 and it's not something that I'd really had that thought process. And I do share that now with people, that does need to be considered.
Oh, yes.
Every headstone tells a story.
Yeah.
And you'll go to a cemetery and there they are all laid out in front of you. Places like Listenhook or Tynecott. Listenhook, 11,000. Amongst that lot, yes, a lot of ordinary folk, like you and I, but maybe there was the guy who could have cracked cancer 50 years ago, buried there. Maybe there was a man who could have been on the moon or done something remarkable, whose life was just lost for in some respects, for what? Because, as we say, mankind doesn't learn very well from history.
No.
It's a lot of thought. In the same vein, I'd like to know more about the contrast in the way the Germans and the British cemeteries, that stark visual impact that it had and the way that they remembered and marked the deaths of their soldiers. Can you just elaborate on that and how you use that to widen the scope of students' thinking?
Yes, well, quite often when we're at eat, we'll go to Tynecott and then we'll go to Langemarck. And Langemarck is a fairly small area. What is it as a percentage of the Tynecott area?
Yeah.
Tiny. And yet there's 44,000 people buried in this tiny area. And in particular, there's 25,000 buried underneath one particular plot of ground, which is 3-4 times the size of this room, perhaps.
And that is impossible to comprehend in this
And yes, the cemeteries, when I first started going out, they were fairly unkempt.
Yeah.
I think there was a sense of shame in some respects from the German people. And I did actually talk to a German professor who was exploring this concept. There's something of a sense of shame. But now we're seeing more and more Germans going out to their cemeteries and seeing their relatives there and pursuing their own histories.
Yeah, the younger generation, you're quite right. But those in their, post-war who are in their 70s now or 80s, they just still didn't talk about the war, First World or Second World War. They had their heads buried in the sand, shall I say. They didn't want to be reminded of what had happened. But as Tony says, we're getting more German people coming, which is good. Because as you said earlier on, they all had mothers, fathers, boyfriends, girlfriends, brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
That's what it's all about. And
I
hopefully
don't
they'll learn from history.
And I don't think that's something that students can truly ever learn from any text in a textbook or an image. I think just being on site there and actually realising that space that you're talking about, the amount of bodies that are there and why it was done that way is just so, it's quite mind-blowing, really. Quite mind-blowing.
Sometimes if I've got a boys' school, I relate it to football stadiums. As Tony says, 44,000. And you say, what size football stadium is that? And, and I said, this lot wouldn't even fit in that football stadium. Or, and they can relate to that, believe it or not, the size of a football stadium and the number of deaths.
Yeah, crikey. Obviously, you've been doing this job for a long time now for us and working with us. You are our friends. But I also realise when we're out on tour that you have a lot of friends on location. And I know that we're passionate about, obviously, students getting out and getting on these tours and really experiencing it all firsthand. The visits and network of friends that you have in Belgium, wherever we are. What kind of relationship is that, and how do you come together to kind of make everything the best it can be combined?
I think you have to make yourself available. I'm sure Tony will agree with me. Some of the guys go out there and they're downright rude and obnoxious, and think they're the best thing since sliced bread, should we say? I think if you visit sites, and as many sites as we do know the people there. We build that rapport up over the years. Because if you build the rapport up, you're going to get a reward at the end of the day.
Yeah.
They're going to look after you, or they're going to give you more information. If something local has happened, they're going to say, oh, by the way, such and such happened, or such and such a body's been discovered recently in this area, which
Yeah.
you'd never, you'd be hard to find the
And
information.
there's a reburial ceremony tomorrow at Tyne-Cock, for example, or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
But, I do recall bumping into a chap at Yorkshire Trench, one of the diggers, one of the chaps that goes down there, and he was sitting there at Yorkshire Trench, and I said hello. I thought, I recognise you. Yes, he said, yeah, I'm one of the people that found this place and explored it. Oh, I said, interesting. He said, yes, we go out most weekends. He said, I can't go underground anymore, though, he said, because there's still lots of gas down there, and it's affecting my lungs. So I no longer can go down. And so it's just the war is still very much there.
It's
in places
mustard
like that.
gas.
Yes.
Sorry?
It's the mustard gas
Mm-hmm.
that's buried in the ground from 100 years on.
Mm.
Yeah,
Crikey.
things like that. People don't, you know.
Okay. Another thing that I know you love bringing to the tours and you bang on about, rightly so, is that actually you knowing more about the school that you're going to be travelling with prior to the tour is absolutely critical.
Mhm.
Explain some examples of what you're wanting to know, how you can help tailor the tour when you've got that kind of knowledge.
Well, it also helps to find out boys, girls, the numbers on that for a start. Because if you've got girls on there, you can angle it. People often forget that women took a big part of World War One. It is often forgotten, which is a great pity. You know, I mean, you have to put it in the context that the men went off to war. Who was going to drive the trams? Who was going to drive the trains? Who was going to be the postman?
Who was going to make the bombs?
Who's going to, yes.
The Canaries.
The Canaries, as they were called, the munitionettes.
Yeah.
And then you've got the VAD, you've got the Red Cross, and all these women, high-class society women that volunteered to go, you know, away from their luxury life of living in their stately homes here, went out onto the First World War, onto the front there.
It's like you say, that's your role, isn't it, to give that balance for you of everything.
And that's what you've got to put across to them.
And what about religion, the religion of school? Where
Yes,
does that kind of play
That's
a part?
very important because, again, that's one of the things we find is often forgotten. Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, they all took part.
They all took part. Yes, and that's another side of it. When you're talking to the school, or perhaps what's the if you like to call it this, the ethnic mix within the school. Have we got folks whose origins were India? You know, maybe several generations ago, but they still have, you know, Indian origins, and so therefore we can tailor the tour to make sure we visit the Indian sites like Neuve Chapelle. And create a balance and get everybody involved rather than just the English Anglo-Saxons, if you want for a better description.
Yeah.
One poignant story that you told me was when a child has a family member that they know is potentially buried in the location that you are, that you get them to it. And I like the analogy that you like to leave them to have a conversation with their lost relative. Just describe that, how that works and what you do.
Well, after we've taken them down, we get the school with them and try and find, as Tony said earlier, research information, and sometimes they bring the information with them and hold a little service there and get the person to lay a cross. Most of us carry remembrance crosses in our bags. And so they do that. And the school then, their friends go, oh, you know, we went and had a little ceremony there because of a pilgrimage. And then always, the way I work it is I always leave them with them to talk to the headstone, to talk to the grandparent or great-great-uncle, to tell them, you know, oh, my name's Anne, I'm out here on year 13, I'm studying history and I've come out today, and leave them there to talk. They're a bit embarrassed at first, but as Tony says, normally we get their best friend to sit with them just to give them reassurance and everything. And then I take the whole school, teachers away, everything.
Nice.
And we also do, another thing we do is we get them to sign the book when we go to the Commonwealth War Graves Cemeteries. You know, the visitors there? And I always say to the person, write your thoughts. I said, I don't want to know. Here's the book. You sign it on behalf of the school and write the thoughts that this has made. And then shut the book and put it back in the safe.
See, they're making history right there, aren't they?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Very poignant. And I should imagine those moments like I say, from me being on tour, that kids are never, ever, ever going to forget. I know from my experience on tour, I will never forget the moments on that trip. You know, just certain things trigger just how impactful they are. I think hearing a guide, someone like Richard Broadhead on the battlefield, bringing out individual stories, they resonate, they sit with you, you can relate them to your own life, and you can see the students doing that, like thinking about their own parents and the age they are, and these were the age that these kids were running out and losing their lives.
And we have hidden little treasures. I mean, you know, I go to a little cemetery where Peter Pan's buried. You know, and you show them Llewellyn Davis, Lieutenant Llewellyn Davis, and he is Peter Pan. The story of Peter Pan was written about him. And
interesting.
It just looks like an ordinary grave.
Yeah.
But, you know, the history behind it.
Yeah, it is bringing those stories to life, isn't it? Which is the most important thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think the students ever really... I was worried going out on the battlefield that the students, because we're seeing so many cemeteries, will just get disengaged. And that is the absolute skill of a history guide, 100%. For me, I wouldn't visit the battlefields without a history guide. I think they are absolutely 100% key.
Talk about Private Peaceful.
Private Peaceful, yes. This is a Bedford House cemetery just to the south of Ypres. And Michael Morpurgo was wandering amongst the graves, and he sees on the headstone, Private Peaceful. And that is the stimulus for him to write the book. I mean, the man beneath the headstone is obviously not the man in the book, but out it comes from there. When we look at literature in particular, and read something like Lord of the Rings, there are so many elements within the Lord of the Rings. The march through the dead marshes, for example, where the faces of the dead just under the level of the water that Tolkien saw, that was bodies in shell holes. Some of the dugouts, you know, where the hobbits live, the little round dugouts and that sort of stuff.
Because he was there.
He was there on the Somme in 1916. And you can stay in the hotel that he stayed on his last night, the Plough and Harrow in Birmingham. It is. It's a little blue plaque on the wall where he stayed before he went off to the Somme. So, yes, lots. Tarka the Otter, written. Gosh, I can't remember the name of the author off the top of my head, but it was written. He was recovering from the trials of the war and down in the Devon countryside, writing this book, Tarka the Otter. Henry Williamson, that's the name.
Okay.
And then poetry, of course. It's good to bring poetry in because, you know, you have the number, you know, Sassoon, etc., etc.
That is really emotional, seeing a child read out a poem. I know that happened on our tour, and it took me just seeing that child read those words, and they do it with such respect. They really were, aren't they, showing respect once they get out on there. And it's a very heartfelt experience. I actually reflected on the 2 trips that I've been on, so kind of my final question, it's a funny one. I'm trying to think how to word it. I've tried to have an argument on my own internal thoughts on which of the trips, Berlin or the battlefields, was most impactful on me. And it is an absolute battle that you have in your mind. And for one reason, the battlefields 100%, just the scale of loss was so monumental. And the role of the guide just left me with so many significant memories. But then balance that against Berlin and that big, vibrant city experience with such a scale of different kinds of visits. If there was one destination you'd pick out that you'd say is the most impactful tour destination that you deliver, and why does it pack that punch, really, do you think? What would it be for each of you?
I suppose Sachsenhausen in Berlin. Because I know that I know your opinion on that, but of course that, when you go there and you just realise what happened there. I mean, you have the battlefields of Somme and everything, we know the mass killing, but when you go to places like Sachsenhausen and what man did to man.
No.
And then after the war, the Soviets did it to the Nazis that imprisoned there in prisons. You know.
So that's the one for you that you
I think that's quite. But it links in with Vansay when we do the Vansay
Yeah.
conference, where they decided, in an hour and a quarter, the future of.
I think it's those two visits actually. Now you say that actually, right, as an adult, I find it very hard to rationalise that kind of thing could ever have happened. How did concentration? How did anyone think that was a rational thing to do in life, and what benefit?
Yeah.
And then, like you say, the Wannsee conference, like just seeing in that short space of time that such monumental decisions were made, and that caused a lot of conversation with the students, I think. And it was such a beautiful setting.
Right by the lake there, of course.
Yeah, quite a romantic setting, and to actually think. Again, I think it was good for the students to actually be able to see the bios of the people that made those decisions.
And how few ended up sentenced. Yeah, they got away with it.
So, yeah. What about you? What's for you?
I suppose I don't tour those particular tours that you talk about there, but if you like, on the First War Battle of the Ypres, the way we hung on to that little piece of land, because we had a treaty which said we were going to protect the Belgians, the 1837 Treaty of London, and we were going to hang on to that. Oh, that's the last little bit of Belgium. And the losses on both sides, as the Germans tried to kick us out and we tried to push them out there. And the way, too, that now that is still remembered, that ceremony that takes place every night at the Menin Gate, come hell or high water, it takes place, even took place during the Second World War, when the Germans again took over the city. The buglers still played on. They played at the Brookwood Cemetery in Guildford, near Guildford in Surrey. And the minute the war, the liberation of Ypres took place, they were back there, even though there was still fighting going on. So they were back there playing that last post at 8 o'clock that night. And one night I actually approached the man that leads the big tall chap, Matthew, and I said, "Thanks very much. Thanks for that tonight." And he said, "No. It's us thanking you for what you did."
They do have that mindset, don't they?
Yeah.
Very generous with their
No,
affection and emotion.
it's done in remembrance and thanks for what the British and the Empire troops did for the for the Belgian people. So.
Wonderful. Have anything else that you would like to share with us about kind of the benefits of schools doing these trips with students?
Yeah, I think having a history guide, because of our knowledge, it's probably the personal stories we can deliver, and we both have articles and letters from people who were there. And Leesenhoek, there's a guy that died on the last day of the war. 11th of the 11th, 1918, and he's written a letter home. And of course, by the time his wife got it, he was dead. And it's little things like that
Stories.
you get into.
Well, I just want to say I feel absolutely privileged to be in your company. I feel utterly privileged to have been on tour with you, Trev. You certainly opened my eyes in ways that I didn't know or expect. Can't wait to get out on tour with you now. It's been a real privilege speaking to you. I'm so happy that you're here, sharing your knowledge with our teams so that they can pass this on to schools. I'm sure we're all going to leave educated, and if people are watching or listening to this and want more information about how guides work with Rayburn, we'll be putting out more content on social media and so on and so forth. So all that's left for me to say is thank you.
Thank you.